today. It's a very early morning. I'm joining in from San Francisco, but that's all right. Almost 7 a.m. and it's an early start to the day for myself. And I have my coffee right here with me along with my water. So we're just going to be good. Today, I'm going to be talking about the future of work and then exploring how the future of work can allow us new avenues for more green economy and more environmentally sustainable practices in the workplace, so that we can achieve a more sustainable and eco-friendly tomorrow. But before we get started there, I want to kind of introduce myself. And this is a picture that I recently took in my Berkeley graduation that happened about a year later. I came into Berkeley in 2016 as an environmental science major, and then switched my major about 4 times, and then ended up on psychology as a major and minored in human rights and theater. It was a very wild ride. It was an amazing experience. Graduated in 2020, loved every single class that I took there. And I just loved the university, loved the professors, and really felt like this was a very insightful experience for me. Going forward, I spent the pandemic year in Turkey, where I worked a lot with a couple of startups part-time. And in a lot of those startups, I occupied more content and community-related positions. But I also had a very, very keen interest in media, and I really wanted to pursue journalism as a career because I had previously interned in NBC in Bay Area, and then in Turkey, I continued to intern in major media organizations like NTV and Harvard Business Review. After spending the pandemic year in Turkey, I decided that I wanted to somehow come back to the US and pursue a job and a career here, because I felt that what I wanted to do and the type of media content that I wanted to cover was more prevalent in bigger countries, and especially the new media industry based on social media journalism was more prevalent here, which is why I ended up coming back to the US this April and then started my job search, and then ended up landing a position in one of my favorite organizations called Brut, which I highly recommend you check out as soon as possible. Brut is a France-based new media organization, and we create new media journalism content. Along with original news content that we create, we also create partnered content, and we partner up with especially sustainability and environmentally driven organizations like Greenpeace and RDC. And we recently closed our recent media partnership with Arnold Schwarzenegger in his Austrian World Summit focusing on climate change. And so my work has so many intersections with the environment, giving me a lot of avenues to do more research as we partner with more and more organizations. And I look into what kind of content campaigns we can do with them, which advances the research I do on this. And a lot of this has connected me with the topic of future work and the overall domain of green economy a lot. Apart from my work in Brut, I also did work for the startup called Nooks, which was basically building a virtual office platform. I'm going to come to that, but again, that was really correlated with the concept of future of economy because it was completely associated with remote work concepts, and it was only for remote and hybrid workers. So it's definitely given me an additional avenue to look into the concept of what the future of work was going to look like. So that's me. And now let's slowly start getting into the topic itself. So something really major happened about a year and a half ago that shook the world to its core. And of course, what it did was it started accelerating a lot of trends that were intrinsic in the work system in the world right now. So there were a lot of things happening. Technology was already advancing, the climate was already changing. So many things were already happening. But what COVID-19 did was it really accelerated these trends. And the first thing that happened was that obviously millions of people lost their jobs. And the jobs that were mostly lost were the ones with the highest physical proximity. So a lot of job industries ended up getting disrupted. So here, I want to walk us through which those industries are. So the work arenas vary in overall physical proximity a lot of the times, but overall physical proximity is especially very prevalent in the medical industry, the personal care industry, on-site customer interaction like shops or commerce, and then of course leisure and travel, home supports. And then we start going into more like classroom training, indoor production and warehousing, computer-based office work. All of these things require a lot of human interaction as their work arenas. And so these industries got extremely disrupted because people were very afraid of being physically proximate to each other. They also wanted to have all these workplaces ended up having precautions for COVID-19, ending up with a lot of people, a lot of industries and a lot of companies downsizing as quarantine was instructed. And then a lot of people, while a lot of people were losing their jobs, it was essential workers that ended up staying. And these people were working in hospitals, grocery stores, garbage trucks, warehouses, but with new restrictive protocols. So what else happened during this time? We saw a lot of offices closing and then remote work becoming the norm. So remote work and virtual meetings are likely going to continue after the pandemic, albeit less intensely than at the pandemic. During the pandemic, what we saw is that a lot of companies noticed that a lot of their work could actually be done remotely. So they didn't necessarily need those big offices. They didn't necessarily need the 95 employees coming into the office. So what we're probably going to be seeing is, let's say a big company like IBM holds a huge part of the building, like the entire building is associated for their offices. What they're likely going to do following the pandemic is they're first of all going to downsize, and then they're going to probably not ask all of their employees to return to in-office settings full-time. They're probably going to have some sort of hybrid way of approaching it. Maybe a part of their staff is going to be remote if they can stay remote or prefer to stay remote. We're also probably going to see these office spaces being rented out to different establishments like startups and new companies. So there's definitely going to be a lot of change happening in the physical spaces that we see. What's interesting here, and I came across the statistic very recently, is that there's definitely a very generational difference when it comes to who wants to go back to the office versus who wants to stay remote. What's interesting is a lot of younger generations tend to prefer to working out of the office because they really want that human interaction. And they're also very recently getting into the workforce. But older generations, having been in the workforce for a while, really prefer the comfort of the ability to stay and work from home, spend more time with their families, and even avoid the morning and afternoon commutes, especially if they're living in a very dense and highly populated area with a lot of traffic. So definitely going forward, remote work is going to be the norm. As I mentioned, I was working for a startup called Nooks, which builds virtual offices. So essentially that's something that takes Zoom, applications like Zoom, Google Meet, Microsoft Teams to another level and creates an entire office space virtually that you can connect through your internet, and then you can hop into people's rooms. And I really feel that these kind of applications going forward are just going to be more and more prevalent. And especially we're seeing small and mid-sized businesses that don't have like a lot of structure and intrinsic rules really transitioning into these spaces more. So third bullet point, we're going to be seeing a lot of automation and technology improving faster than ever. This trend was already happening. We were seeing a lot of automation, a lot of technology advancement, but COVID-19 propelled it even faster, the adoption of automation and AI, especially in work arenas with high physical proximity. So this is interesting here because a lot of the times when I'm speaking to someone, let's say from Gen X or someone in the older generation, they're always in the conversation, there's always a bullet point of, yeah, technology is advancing more than ever. This wasn't like this in my time. Well, you can imagine, I'm 22 years old, almost going to be 23. When I was one, the world looked way different than what it did today. We didn't have smartphones, and I can't even imagine what other people must be feeling, especially if they've lived through this entire technological advancement bubble. So it's definitely been an interesting ride. Technology was already advancing faster than ever, but with COVID-19, it had to accelerate maybe 5-fold, 10-fold that. So a lot of companies, while this was a part of their priority, it wasn't as big of a priority and it wasn't receiving as big of an investment before COVID-19. But going forward, it's only going to be more key. And what that's going to do is automation is likely going to start replacing a lot of jobs. So new jobs will arise, and 25% of workers will probably need to switch occupations. I want to underline that very quickly. 25% means 1 in 4 workers in the world are probably going to need to switch occupations because their previous job is going to be taken over by automation and robots. So the mix of occupations will shift with little job growth in low-wage occupations. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this later, but I want to underline this concept very quickly. There has been done a lot of research about which industries are probably going to be highly disrupted. And then it's showing that automation and robots and technology, artificial intelligence, is probably going to be replacing low-skilled labor. What that means is there are a lot of industries like agriculture, let's say transportation industry, let's say service industry, that don't necessarily require a college degree, that don't necessarily require higher education or like an advanced skill. But on the other hand, there are other industries like healthcare, technology, STEM, and then corporate professionals, legal professionals, and also even the arts industry that require a lot of education, require a lot of skills. These industries are less likely to be disrupted by automation and technology like in the recent future, while the other industries that require low-skilled labor are probably going to be disrupted very quickly. This creates a minor crisis, as I like to put it, because there's already a very huge discrepancy in economic advancement among different communities. So there's a huge wage gap. And there's also something that economists like to call the vicious cycle, where people who are born into less economically developed communities who have less access, they have less access to resources, they have less quality of education, and then end up not getting those skills that are required for those higher paying jobs, for those higher skilled labor. So what that does is it kind of creates a vicious cycle that enforces something like the Buddhist caste system, where when you're born into a family, your kids are probably going to be born into the same situation, the same less economically developed, less socioeconomically well-off situation, and they're not going to have the same access to these resources to support themselves and gain those skills. And then they're also going to be occupying low-skilled jobs unless there is some sort of intervention. And so this is very key, because now we're talking about 1 in 4 people losing their jobs or having to switch their occupations. And those are likely going to be people who are already not that well off economically. So what that's going to do is there are going to have to be ways in which they're going to have to acquire these new skills to create some sort of avenue for them to reach these high-paying, high-skilled jobs. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I want to take a moment to really highlight the key statistics for the new face of work that I kind of mentioned. So 20 to 25% of workforces in advanced economies could actually work from home at least 3 days a week. This goes back to what I was saying about a lot of people are probably going to stay remote, because a lot of companies notice at least 1/4 of their workforce can actually work remotely almost always. And that's very, very huge, because before the pandemic, this was unheard of. No one could say, yeah, like, let's strike the offices. Let's not have anyone come into the office. Let's have everyone work from home. Everyone would probably assume productivity would diminish. They probably wouldn't be able to get the job done. And it's not going to be the same as face-to-face interaction. And here I agree. I really don't think face-to-face interaction can be replaced by remote interactions. Like right now, I would much rather be doing this presentation to you, coming to Canada myself. It would also be a great vacation for me, but I obviously can't. But what it's also doing is it's giving us an opportunity to connect in 2 drastically different parts of the world, drastically different time zones. So it's also creating a lot of opportunities. So what would normally be a business trip, let's say, can be done in the matter of minutes over the internet. So that's going to be very interesting to see that kind of trade-off of what can we win from human interaction. So what is going to be essential going forward, and then what is going to be more optimized through these internet interactions. So a McKinsey survey that I looked into shows that office spaces will likely be reduced as a consequence of this by 30%. That's a huge amount. So what we're probably going to be seeing is, let's say in a major city you're walking and you see so many skyscrapers. I really don't know what they're going to replace these office spaces with. So let's say Salesforce in San Francisco is one of the biggest establishments here. They have about 10 buildings, and I'm not talking about small buildings. They're huge buildings. The Salesforce Tower is the tallest building in San Francisco, and it has a lot of occupants. If indeed they downsize by 30%, that not only has impact for a lot of new room for different kinds of startups and organizations, it's also actually great for the environment, which I'm going to get to in a bit, because these office spaces are also leaving a lot of carbon footprint. But we will discuss that. As mentioned, we will also see a 20% reduction in business travel, which is not surprising because travel is risky during COVID-19, and going beyond, travel is also very expensive for companies. So again, companies are going to have to decide, is this vacation or is this business trip essential for me to send my employee to, and fund it? And is it a risk that I'm willing to take, or is it something that we can do over a virtual meeting? Then let's finally get into some of the industrial trends that happened, and then how they're going to have some long-term effects. So in 2020, the share of e-commerce grew at 2 to 5 times the rate before COVID-19. E-commerce really did become a very key term. And in China, e-commerce, delivery, and social media jobs grew by more than 5.1 million in 2020. So as you know, this is not surprising again, because during the pandemic, what we could only do was to order stuff to our houses to entertain ourselves. I remember me and my parents, we probably bought these like coloring books. A lot of my friends ended up buying a lot of toys, but apart from entertainment, there were also so many essential needs that could only be delivered to you through delivery services and then ordering online. So someone who would probably typically say, yeah, I don't like shopping online. I want to like go to the store itself and try things on or see for myself in my hands the product. They couldn't do that. So e-commerce as a result became the optimal resource for them to get their essential needs. Like maybe they had medical needs, healthcare needs, they needed medication, they needed food, groceries. We saw startups. There's a startup from Turkey called Getir that ended up being one of the first unicorns of Turkey, which means they were one of the first organizations to receive $1 billion of value. So they are actually a grocery delivery service that is backed by an app. And so you order your groceries from an app, and now they're growing globally. I think they're probably going to hit the decacorn mark, which is $10 billion, which is so exciting because they're e-commerce based and they're based in Turkey. And it's just to show that these kind of companies are just going to be bigger and bigger going forward. So if you are thinking of investing, I would recommend e-commerce as a very key avenue for your investments. And then finally, 2/3 of executives are stepping up investment in automation and AI. This again goes back to my previous point of, yes, while AI and automation was key, now it's just going to be even more prioritized, and it's probably going to advance whatever was happening so far at a faster pace. Now let's talk a little bit about what I was mentioning beforehand about the economic inequity of it all. The wage gap, which was already really pronounced, will likely become even more pronounced. With automation and the pandemic, supply of low skill and low paying jobs will diminish, especially in the food and service industry. And this means that a lot of workers will have to switch industries and find means of acquiring new skills. Here I want to highlight something. The economic inequity and the wage gap is especially more pronounced for women, for ethnic and racial minorities, and for people who are living in communities that are economically disadvantaged. So already there was a gap that was kind of becoming more and more accelerated by this vicious cycle that we were talking about already, because these communities or ethnic minorities, racial minorities, even gender-based situations where people are more disadvantaged when they're coming into the workforce, they have access to less resources. Now it's just going to be even more challenging for them to find those jobs because the jobs that they can qualify for are shrinking. And the jobs that are growing in, let's say, STEM, healthcare, require a lot of education. And you know what education requires? A lot of money. Unless you get some sort of scholarship, unless you get some sort of intervention from a government, from an organization, unless there are these companies, organizations that really have those impacts, are doing the right things to create access for all these people so that they can break this cycle. I think a lot of responsibility falls on a lot of companies, policymakers, so that this vicious cycle just doesn't continue. And I think with COVID-19, while this is a challenge, this is also an opportunity that I see, because now with let's say all this additional revenue and assets that they have, let's say they sold half of their office space, that's going to give them a lot of assets. What they can use that is for the good of the people, of their workforce, and even to they can support environmental initiatives. They can support the training and education of their lower branch employees. So a very inspiring story that I came across the other day was there was this employee that came into the Apple headquarters in Palo Alto as a cleaning lady. And then she stayed in Apple for about 15 years. And after a couple of years of working as the cleaning lady, she started overhearing a lot of these conversations that were happening in the office spaces, and then really wanted to pursue a very low tier entry level position. And she actually got it because everyone in the office space loved her. She ended up becoming one of the regional managers in 10 to 15 years. This is an amazing success story. And it's so sad that this is just such a unique situation that doesn't happen all the time. But it also shows that companies like Apple, when they're employing so many people, have the opportunity to really train these individuals. And who knows, they might be the face of this company in that region, in that country, in the world, maybe in 10 years, 15 years after they receive that training. It's not like people who are born into more advantaged positions are smarter in general. They're not. It's a genetic thing, and genetically we're all inclined to have the same average intelligence. It's just the resources and the socioeconomic situation that we're born into, and the access to educational resources and then developmental resources that we have that create that gap in the first place. So we can help mend that gap with the resources we provide to those communities that really are in a disadvantaged position. So a McKinsey Future Work Report shows that Europe and the United States, workers with less than a college degree, members of ethnic minority groups, and women are more likely to need to change occupations after COVID-19 than before. Again, this shows how striking of a challenge this is, but also shows how striking of an opportunity COVID-19 is going to present going forward to really find ways and policies and organizational campaigns to really help mend that gap. So what can be done? Policy change and corporate responsibility is a very big thing. So to build a more resilient, more talented, and better paid workforce going forward, really the responsibility falls on corporations and governments. The scale of workforce transition set off by COVID-19's influence increases the urgency for businesses and policymakers to take steps to support additional training programs for workers, like the training programs that I was just mentioning. Companies and governments exhibited extraordinary flexibility and adaptability in responding to the pandemic with purpose and innovation that they might also harness to retool the workforce for a brighter future. So here, I really love the concept of retooling the workforce because the workforce is already there. It just needs to be optimized. It just needs to be trained and given the right resources so that the entire workforce can go forward and not stuck in a rut in the bottom lines and the bottom branches. we have, and as the world, we have immense potential. We have people everywhere that have access to this amazing thing called the brain. We all have it, and we all, if given the right resources, we can all flourish with it. It's as simple as that. And I think if governments and companies really see that and give those resources to people who can really turn it into something amazing, we can just keep wheeling the chart, but towards a better direction where we see a brighter future in the workforce. Having said that, let's jump into how this connects to the environment. I want to start out by kind of outlining some key terms here in terms of green economy and circular economy. So one key term that I came across very recently is circular economy, which is a model of production and consumption involving sharing, recycling to tackle climate change. So it's basically an economy that kind of runs on its own and doesn't need additional resources because the resources that are already produced can be recycled and put back into the economy. Green economy, on the other hand, is more low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive economic policies being brought forward for companies and governments so that they can reduce their carbon footprint. And then finally, sustainable economy is resilient and provides a good quality of life for everybody, reducing the carbon footprint. So these three keywords are kind of aligned, but also represent different avenues for opportunities in which companies and industries can go forward, becoming more sustainable and eco-friendly. Let's talk a little bit more about these concepts. So as I mentioned, I've been working for Brut, and we've been partnering with a lot of companies trying to showcase their impact initiatives, especially in the environmental arenas. And I came across so many examples of an amazing corporate responsibility, especially when it comes to the environment. And I really want to give these examples, and I hope that other companies and organizations follow this. So the first one that I came across is the 100+ accelerators supporting circular economy. And there, major companies like AB InBev and Coca-Cola partnered together to fund and pilot sustainable innovation in supply chains. This also includes their recent initiative called the Corona Plastic Reduction Campaign. And that's not Corona for COVID-19, that's Corona the beer. And so what they're doing is they're trying to be completely plastic free in the next couple of years. And they've also started this initiative where they're also looking into how plastic waste contributes to water systems and how it contaminates the water in general. So what they noticed is there's a lot of research that needs to be done in that arena to help minimize how plastic waste impacts the oceans, impacts water quality, and then also find ways
to stop using plastic.
Yeah, exactly. That's also a great point. But they're also trying to reduce their use of plastic through recycling things that are already been put out there. So I recently came across a story of you're probably familiar with plastic water bottle collectors. You've probably seen them in the streets going through some of the trashes and trying to find those plastic bottles. There's actually been an initiative that started in less economically developed countries. A lot of these countries have a lot of plastic waste because they don't really have those means and resources to recycle plastic and other kind of recyclable material. And so what AB InBev and these other corporations in the 100+ accelerator are doing is they're going to these countries, they're appointing people who come from less economically developed backgrounds, and they're appointing them as their plastic bottle ambassadors. And these ambassadors are going through the city, trying to find those water bottles and then giving them back, donating them back to AB InBev so that they can be recycled for that next line of water bottles. So that's just a key way of promoting circular economy. The second example, which I love, is Costa Rica running fully on renewable energy by 2021, which is this year. So in the last 4 years, Costa Rica has generated 98.53% of its electricity from renewable resources. They actually won an award for this year, going fully renewable. And that's just very inspiring to me because this is not a company, this is an entire country. And an entire country showed the world that they can be run by renewable energy. I think this is very exciting because this is just going to create new avenues of growth, and it's going to push renewable energy and sustainable energy forward, especially given that automation and artificial intelligence is advancing at its scale more than ever. That kind of investment is probably going to go into sustainable energy resources because they require more technology, more advanced technology, but they also give more yield. They give more of an power to us. And also going forward, it's just going to be more promoted. A lot of companies are now seeing a lot of restrictions when they're using fossil fuels, even though there is a lot of corruption that goes into this because a lot of fossil fuel companies have very intimate ties with a lot of governments because they bring in a lot of revenue. But going forward with the climate crisis and Greta Thunberg, I'm just optimistic that a lot more companies are going to be pressured more into adopting renewable energy. It's a very key player here also is the media. And media has a great way of holding people accountable when they do give people exposure to the truth and awareness to what's happening. But it's not only the media, organizations also have a lot of responsibility when it comes to this, which brings me to my third point, which is Open Society Foundations and Global Witness. And these two companies got together to hold companies and governments accountable for environmental destruction and human rights abuses, especially when it comes to environmental issues. So an example I can bring here is recently, a lot of less economically developed countries or just developing countries noticed that they were seeing a lot of waste in their shores. And there were also instances where we found fields and fields in countries like Malaysia, Thailand, where there was just waste and no one knew where this came from. And this obviously was a huge crisis because it was not only impacting their environment, it was also impacting their water quality. And so some research was done by these companies, and it was noticed that more economically developed countries like the US and UK are transporting a lot of the waste that they have to these countries as a means of outsourcing their recycling initiatives. But what happens is this waste is basically transported to these countries, not recycled, not managed properly, and ends up really deteriorating the environment. And obviously, less economically developed countries are very willing to receive any money for just anything. So at that point, they freely admit this waste. But then while the government is admitting the waste, there's no way for them to really properly manage it, recycling it. And then the burden falls into the citizens that live in those areas, near those waters. And then it's obviously a huge crisis. And then, of course, if this were to be happening without the exposure of media or without the exposure of these organizations, this would just go unnoticed. This would probably not even make the newspapers because the governments are allowing this. But through these kind of organizations that are holding people accountable, we have ways to empower citizens to really showcase these environmental atrocities and then to help prevent them from ever happening again. So again, this is just a very great example of how the responsibility not only falls on policymakers and governments and companies, but also media organizations, which is why I'm very excited going forward to be in a media organization, not backed by any government, but is a new media-based, social media powered platform that can help showcase these initiatives, showcase these efforts. And I'm very excited for the near future where the future of work is hopefully going to be an opportunity, not a challenge. And we're going to use it in the right way to make a very sustainable, more environmentally eco-friendly future. So thank you. You can reach me at my email. And then I really, really highly recommend that you check out brut.media as well. We have a lot of content that we're producing on the environment. And then another very quick plugin that I can do here is I also work for this startup in mindfulness meditation and habit building called Insumo.io. So if that's also something that you're interested in, I would love for you to check out our app. Thank you.
Thank you. Ceylan. It was really a very good presentation and summary what happened during COVID and its impacts in the green economy or the environment. And seeing young people like you, it gives hope to me that we can change what's going on right now in both environment and the society, I should say. Do you have any questions, James or Mom?
Yeah, that boxed water is better is ridiculous.
Why would you say that?
Because you don't need bottled water or boxed water, just drink it from the tap. And the problem with the companies is they've been delaying recycling and reusing the product for decades, and until they actually are required to take the bottles back and put them back into service, nothing's going to change. I mean, the thing is, they got to take it back, put a deposit on it, they'll take it back and then make sure that they use it. But
not everybody have a tap. Not everybody have a tap. People have portable water they want on the road everywhere.
Yeah. But here in Canada, in the US, potable water around.
Not everybody. They still need portable water.
That's a very good point, actually, because that's a very key trade-off that a lot of people are battling with. So a lot of people around the world lack a lot of access to clean water, and the only way they can get access to that clean water to bottled water transported to them. And so now they're just trying to find ways of kind of fighting with that trade-off of how to give people more access to clean water, but at the same time have it come from recyclable backgrounds. And so a lot of companies are just now pushing for reusable bottles, but obviously not everyone's going to have access to that. So it's definitely a trade-off to keep in mind.
I think Canada is one of the luckiest countries. I mean, in Turkey, for example, not a lot of people have the opportunity to reach clean water. So that's why this bottled water is needed. Maybe Ceylan, I think associations or clubs like Rotary can also work on this change. And as an environment committee, we are trying to find out projects for ourselves that can have an impact. Small or big, doesn't matter, but we want to do something. Maybe if you have any ideas or any cooperations that you think we can work on in the future, I'm ready to discuss, and we can discuss it in our environment committee. As you said, I will look at it in US, who is in, especially in New York, from Rotary is working on environment. We'll let you know and get in contact, okay?
Great, that would be very exciting.
You are a very good speaker, and you need to address your speech mostly to young generation, because really you are a very good example for young generation to follow.
I totally agree.
Hey, thank you.
Yes, really. Yes. I'm really proud of you, Ceylan.
Yeah, you should be. Yeah, really.
Yes.
She's a very good speaker.
Yeah. It's.
Thank you very much. Really,
thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It was a great opportunity. I loved meeting all of you. Hopefully we can get connected again in the near future.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Ceylan, and I wish you best luck in your new city and in your new job. I'm sure
we all do. We all do.
Yeah, she will do. Yeah. So thank you very much for participating. This
thank you.
Great
nice to see you again.
See you again. Yes.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good day.
You too.